The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested. Born in the Yaroslavl town of Danilov, Yermolai Savelyovich Rebrov was 23 years old when he was reassigned to the Urals in 1975. Coming from an affluent household of party functionaries dedicated to maintaining the integrity of the Soviet Union, he was loyal to the motherland and had unshakable faith in the ideals of communism. General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev read his name once on a list of young officers recommended for reassignment to a top-secret installation that had brought him and many other Soviet leaders a number of sleepless nights. If one was prone to believing rumors, one might have believed that Stalin himself had been afraid of it. It was an assignment that required the most loyal, capable, and dedicated people. The kind of person who believed in the wisdom of the party and its leadership, and would sacrifice everything for the Soviet Union, its citizens, and possibly the world itself. People who would have been useful in a great many positions, but were needed more urgently in the mountains. It was because Brezhnev signed that very document that Sergeant Major Rebrov arrived at the foot of Mount Yamantau on a brisk spring afternoon, after an 8-hour trip on the back of a military truck, together with 19 other men. They were loaded off in the courtyard of a barracks complex built around a gigantic door leading straight into the mountain itself. The soldiers out here, who inspected the new arrivals one by one and verified their identities, looked at them with pity. 3 of the young recruits were pulled away. They were not meant to enter the complex, but become a part of the outside barracks. Though they seemed disappointed, the other soldiers told them they should be relieved. They were the lucky ones. An alarm sounded, and the great door into the mountain opened. It was thicker than Yermolai was tall, full of complex mechanisms and heavy locking bars. Machine guns were pointed at it from several towers. An old man stepped out into the courtyard, flanked by 4 lieutenants. He wore the beige uniform and blue hat of the NKVD, and had the look of someone who had seen nothing but war in his long life. Even so, he stood straight as an arrow, bearing whatever burden was on his shoulders with the iron discipline of a seasoned military commander. He introduced himself as Colonel Porfiry Emelianovich Buzinsky and commanded the recruits to follow him into the mountain. When they were all inside the garishly lit, downward-sloping concrete tunnel, an atavistic kind of fear welled up in Yermolai's stomach. It was impossible to judge the size of the underground complex, but the weight of it felt gigantic. A lieutenant led them to a sleeping room, where each had been assigned a bunk. Nobody spoke. Silence had made this place its home. It seemed like steps did not make a sound on the linoleum floors of the long hallways. When they had stowed their luggage, the lieutenant led them into a dimly lit classroom. The chalkboard was obscured with a heavy curtain. Colonel Buzinsky was sitting behind a heavy desk, inspecting his new recruits one by one. "I am a killer of enemies," the old man said when they were all seated. "When I was young, I fought in the Great Patriotic War and killed over 100 German fascists. I was among those who liberated Auschwitz. It was a place of horror unlike any I had ever seen." He rose from his chair and began pacing in front of them. "Every day I wish myself back to that place. Compared to where I am today, it was idyllic, peaceful, even cozy. Yes, you heard me right. I would trade this life away even if it meant experiencing the horrors of the war every day, and it would not be a difficult decision." Yermolai frowned. Going to war for the glory of the Soviet Union, especially fighting an enemy as heinous as the Nazis, must have been a great honor. Only the weak were broken by the trepidations of war. But Buzinsky was a colonel. His wisdom had to be respected. Instead of offering further explanation, the colonel pulled away the curtain, revealing not a chalkboard, but a window. Behind it, A handful of men and women in white lab coats sat in a canteen, eating borscht. They all had heavy bags under their eyes, their stares trailing off into the distance every few moments. None seemed to notice the soldiers looking at them. The window only went one way. "I would like to direct your attention here." Buzinski pointed at the left corner of the room, where a man who had just entered was pressing buttons next to an aluminium box. A few moments later, a light blinked green, and the man opened the box to find his own bowl of borscht inside. "This is not a machine. There are cooks on the other side of that panel, and he has just communicated to them how he would like his lunch. It is imperative that he be unable to speak with them in any other way. To ensure this is our mission here." The colonel pulled a canvas over the window, and a projector clicked on in the back of the room. A floor plan of the complex appeared, laid out in 3 concentric circles. The outermost was the thinnest. It was green, designated military area, and isolated from the next ring save for a number of locked doors. The science area was blue, and featured many more rooms with cryptic designations, some of which were too small to read even for someone with Yermolai's excellent eyesight. They included things like stereophone dimmer, obeisance chamber, and albumin sieve. The center, occupying most of the base, was left entirely blank. Subject was all it said. "Our duty at this installation is to observe and monitor these scientists. They know we are here to keep them safe, but they cannot talk to us, and we cannot talk to them. We make their food, clean their chambers, and sometimes go in to apprehend and pacify individuals who have lost their mind. But we cannot, under any circumstances, talk to them." Yermolai felt the need to raise his hand. "Why is this, sir?" Colonel Buzinski's grin looked more like a snarl. "Because of their work." Unsatisfied with the response, he raised his hand again. "What is their work, sir?" "They do the same thing we do. Observe and monitor." After a month of service, confined to the underground space of Yamantau base, not having seen the sun in what felt like a lifetime, Yermolai was beginning to grasp the routines and practices of the complex. Even the simplest of tasks were fastidiously described in various manuals, and everyone with experience working here was highly scrupulous of following protocol. Peculiar events were beginning to pile up. The first week, Yermolai was under the impression that one of his comrades in the sleeping quarters was a loud snorer. Every night, in his dreams, he heard calm, rhythmic breathing, and he wasn't the only one. However, when he awoke early one night, at first suspecting that he had been roused by the snorer, he found that the room was utterly silent. After a visit to the lavatory, he had resumed sleeping, and the breathing returned. One day, while mopping the floors, a fellow sergeant who had served here for some time told them to put their ears to the ground. Believing at first that it was some sort of chicanery, Yermolai obliged reluctantly. What he heard drove a cold shiver down his spine. It was a slow, regular thumping, dulled by however many layers of concrete it was passing through. One of his comrades said that it sounded like a heartbeat, but Yermolai could not concur. Hearts beat twice in any given interval, but this thumping only occurred once. He developed a habit of putting his ear to the ground from time to time. The thumping was always there. Yermolai was rolling a food cart through the long tunnel leading to the northern monitoring post, where men with empty eyes and haggard faces listened to microphone feeds from the science area through heavy headsets, when he was told to breach containment for the first time. An alarm howled, and a senior lieutenant ran past him, giving orders to stop pushing the cart and get geared up. Next to each of the doors into the science area, all of which were flanked by 2 guards at all hours of the day, was a locker with breaching equipment for up to 20 soldiers. Yermolai put on a loose containment suit of brown plastic, donned sunglasses that blocked his peripheral vision, and inserted rubber plugs into his ears. Everyone in the breaching party of 4 was given a baton. Only the most senior officer received a small handgun, loaded with non-lethal ammunition. When they entered the science area, Yermolai could hear the whining of atonal klaxons through his earplugs. Heavy fire doors had blocked the hallways around them, as well as access to the individual laboratories. Under no circumstances could the soldiers know what was happening inside. Scientists cowered in the corners, horrified looks on their faces. One came running, pointing them down a hallway. The lieutenant took the lead. It did not take long to find the reason for the alarm. Another scientist, a man in his 40s with Siberian features, was standing at an intersection of 2 corridors, punching wildly in all directions. His shouts cut through the klaxon and the earplugs, yet were too quiet for Yermolai to understand, if they were coherent at all. Quickly, and with overwhelming force, the soldiers subdued the man, administered a sedative, and slipped a straitjacket over him. When they had carried him back into the military area, he was put on a stretcher and thrown into a padded cell. 6 days later, he was delivered to the surface in a body bag. Yermolai inquired with one of the senior officers. It seemed that something like this happened half a dozen times a year. Sometimes it was one of the monitors who snapped, but those were usually easier to handle. The use of lethal force was authorized in such situations. It was not the only time a person died. One morning, Yermolai awoke to find his bunk neighbor, a young man from Moscow named Dmitri, dead. His mouth was open in a silent scream. His eyes were bloodshot and wide open. Nobody had heard a sound that night, least of all Yermolai. They were given an extra ration of good food that day, and told that Dmitri had died of an unexpected heart attack. A bit of questioning revealed that unexpected heart attacks were a common cause of death in the Yamantau complex, and usually included symptoms such as sweating blood and having burns on one's internal organs. It was after 3 months of service that Yermolai and his comrades were allowed their first visit to the surface. When he stepped into the barracks and smelled the fresh mountain air, he realized that he had forgotten what the sky looked like. They spent 3 days of leisure time with the soldiers stationed at the surface. Though they were not allowed to discuss the goings-on inside the complex, the recruits who had arrived with them and were picked for surface duty commented that they all looked half dead while fishing in a small pond. When they went back into the mountain, Colonel Brzezinski was already waiting for Yermolai. "You have been asking many questions," he said in his sparsely furnished office. The only non-essential object in the room seemed to be a bronze-plated orrery, and even there Yermolai could not be certain it wasn't somehow important. "I apologize, sir. If you wish me to stop, I shall do so," Yermolai responded. "Yes and no. You ask questions, but you are good with protocol. We do it in a manner that is not subversive, with consideration for operational morale. This makes you leadership material. It is important for people in senior positions to both think and follow orders, not out of fear, but because they understand the importance of command. I am promoting you to junior lieutenant." "Will I be briefed on what the purpose of this base is, sir?" "No. There are only 4 people alive who have the full picture of this, and I am the only one of them currently stationed here." It was disappointing, but Yermolai trusted the competence of the Soviet institutions. Another 3 months later, after the next visit to the surface, he was promoted again to overseeing the monitoring room. He was without a headset, and it was explicitly not his duty to listen to the microphones inside the science area, but it was impossible not to hear a thing or two. The first thing he realized was that the scientists were not speaking Russian. They weren't speaking any language he could classify at all. It included sounds that he'd never even heard a human being make before, from hisses to whistles to grumbles. He asked one of the monitors if he understood what they were saying, and the man simply shook his head. Whether that was a no or a refusal to answer his question, Yermolai could not tell. One morning he awoke to a gunshot. Considering it had come from the adjacent barracks, it should have been much louder than it was. One of the monitors had committed suicide. Colonel Brzezinski assured him not to worry, as this only happened to the monitors, never the other soldiers. Yermolai did not feel reassured at all. The monitors were working under his supervision. He cared about the people under his command, even if he did not understand what they did. For a week, the scientists seemed more agitated than usual. Through the one-way windows, Yermolai could see them shuffling about more quickly, exchanging concerned glances as they spoke to each other. Their chatter became quieter, more animated. One of them snapped and almost killed another. There was no way for them to know that one of the monitors had died, but they were reacting to it anyway. Shortly after his first anniversary of being stationed at Yamantau base, Yermolai ascended to the surface with Colonel Brzezinski. At first, he thought a new batch of recruits had arrived, but waiting in the courtyard was only a tall, middle-aged woman smoking a cigarette. A new addition to the science team. She did not salute, but continued to smoke, looking at the mountain and the forests. When her cigarette was finished, she dropped the butt on the ground, took several deep breaths, and looked at the colonel with determination. "I need to remember what it's like." "You'll forget soon enough," Brzezinski responded. When the heavy door closed behind them on their way back down, Yermolai realized the truth. This woman knew what she was getting into better than he had. Once she put on that lab coat, she would never return to the surface again. She would be trapped underneath Mount Yamantau until the day she died. A moment later, Yermolai realized that the same was true for him. He would see the surface from time to time, spend a few days out in the sun, but deep inside his heart he knew he would never be able to leave again. Whatever the work they were doing down here was, it was important enough to make loyal soldiers and intelligent scientists disappear forever. It could only be of the utmost importance. If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.